John, welcome.
Good morning, Fran.
John, an appropriate and apportionate response. That's what the Foreign Minister says is most important here to get right. What's your reaction looking on of the way the Australian government has responded to this action from the Chinese authorities?
In a sense, I think the Australian government has very little option. The Australian government is really doing a tit-for-tat escalation. For example, you've seen that the Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang has spoken about this issue publicly, but President Hu has not. Similarly, I think Foreign Minister Smith has spoken about this and is taking a lead in this issue. But I think they're reserving, Kevin Rudd is reserving his right to intervene when he thinks the time is right.
And given that this is a complex diplomatic and economic issue, generally, as the Minister described it, do you think that's the right way to play it, for the Prime Minister not to escalate it to that level yet?
I think so, because the Prime Minister has to refrain from intervening until he thinks that he can actually achieve result. The main problem with this case is that because Sternhu has been detained on national security laws, he can be detained for 10 months without charge. So as I agree Foreign Minister Smith in saying that this will be a long-term issue, it won't be resolved in the next week or next month even.
Nevertheless, what is going on that the Australian government can't even get answers to a simple question like, what are the charges pending against Sternhu? How do you interpret that?
I think it's the Chinese very deliberately trying to humiliate the Australian government by Sternhu being charged on espionage laws rather than any sort of corporate law criminal code. This is a political move. The Chinese know full well that this will have diplomatic consequences, and this was the deliberate policy taken by Beijing.
So why? Why is this China playing hardball for some reason we're not quite clear on?
Well, China has been disappointed with some decisions Australia has made. For example, the Defence White Paper, which implicitly targets China. If you look at the Chinalco case, even though Kevin Rudd was not called to explicitly make a decision, Beijing believes that the government was umming and ahhing and was delaying or was not welcoming to Chinese foreign capital. But I think this is actually consistent with Beijing's pattern of negotiation with other states. It rewards those who comply and it punishes those who do not.
So the Minister's right, this is all about the sorting out the negotiations over the prices of iron ore, and this is China saying play it our way or...
Well, I think
watch out.
I think it's much more about iron ore. I think iron ore, the negotiation over the iron ore price was what brought about this incident in the immediate term. But by elevating it to a matter of national security, Beijing is elevating it into a diplomatic incident. There can be no doubt about that.
So if it's a diplomatic incident, as you've been following, of course, the opposition in this country says the Foreign Minister or the Prime Minister should pick up the phone. Now, you're suggested why they can't do that. That might not do any good. But if it's a diplomatic incident, how should it be played out then? Do you agree with the Minister that it must be followed, step by step in a low-key logical way?
Well, I think Australia should try to follow it in a low-key logical way. And the reason why is that if you push the Chinese publicly, and Kevin Rudd at this stage calling President Hu would do that, that would actually lower the chances that Sternhu would be treated leniently.
Does the Australian government have any leverage here? I mean, and is this sort of event common?
Well, the first question, does the Australian government have any leverage? By making it an element or a matter of national security, the Australian government has basically no leverage. The second question...
does this thing happen
Right.
often? I mean, it happens to happen to Australian national right now, but...
Well, it actually happens surprisingly often. It has happened to Taiwanese nationals. It has happened to Singaporean nationals. A few months ago, it even happened to an American national, although it wasn't a high-profile executive like Sternhu. Of course, this is the first time it's happened to an Australian national, and this is why it's so upsetting for us. But this is perfectly consistent with Beijing's past behaviour.
John Lee, there's been some commentary in the recent days suggesting that there's been a realignment going on with Chinese authorities, that the security forces have been brought into play much more, elevated over the foreign ministry, and with the global financial crisis, they're now playing a role at the economic level. Is that what we're seeing here, the global financial crisis putting pressure on China, and China's response to that is to throw out market economy rules along the way?
To some extent, yes, it is what we're seeing. China has always viewed economic issues as an element of its national interest. However, it's significant, for example, that China has used the Iron and Steel Association, which is a state body, to negotiate with Rio Tinto and BHP, not the steel mills themselves. China has figured that because of the global financial crisis, its leverage over especially Western nations has massively increased. And in some respects, this is the arrogance of a rising power.
John Lee, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
John Lee is Visiting Fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies. It's 2 minutes to 7 on Breakfast.